The trap starts with two listings that look easy to compare. One apartment rents for less, but you pay utilities separately. The other has utilities included, so the rent looks higher. And if your main goal is predictable monthly housing costs, the second one may actually be safer. Because utility expenses can add a substantial, location-dependent extra bill after you move in. That's the part nobody feels on the apartment website. The rent is sitting there in bold. The electric, gas, water, trash, fuel, whatever service gets billed later, that part waits until you've already signed. And the contradiction is annoying, because the smarter choice is not always the cheaper rent. Zillow reported in 2025 that average monthly utilities were about $213 in Memphis, Tennessee, and about $87 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Same country, same word, utilities. Very different bite. So when you ask, is it smarter to rent with utilities included or pay separately for each service? The first comparison feels obvious. Rent versus rent. Cute. Too cute. Because what are you really comparing? Two apartments or one predictable monthly housing cost against another monthly housing cost that keeps arriving in pieces? Most people look at rent like a grocery shelf. This one is $1,300. That one is $1,425. The cheaper one wins. Responsible adult. Somebody finally learned math. But housing doesn't behave like cereal. Rent is the sticker price. Utilities are the receipt after the cashier finishes scanning everything you forgot was in the cart. Electricity, gas, water, fuel, sometimes trash, sometimes a service fee that looks tiny enough to ignore until it brings friends. And here's where it gets weird. The utility bill isn't just extra. It changes the risk of the apartment. Zillow's 2025 apartment utility guidance, citing the 2023 American Community Survey, puts the median cost of utilities in a U.S. apartment at about $150 per month. That sounds manageable when it's floating around as a national number. But you don't pay a national average. You pay the bill for your actual apartment, in your actual city, during your actual weather, with your actual lease. Your kitchen is not the national average. That's why the Memphis and Minneapolis example matters. About 213 versus about 87. That's not a rounding error. That's the kind of difference that can make a lower rent apartment look smart on a tour and feel expensive by the second billing cycle. Now picture the listings again. Apartment A has lower rent, but utilities are separate. Apartment B costs more, but utilities are included. Apartment A wins the website. The rent number is cleaner, bigger font, easier to understand. But apartment A may not be cheaper. It may just be incomplete. And when you're apartment hunting, that matters, because nobody is at their calmest during a move. You're comparing neighborhoods, application fees, pet rules, commute times, deposits, parking, laundry, and whether the cabinet under the sink smells weird. You're not lovingly building a 12-tab spreadsheet. You're trying not to lose the place. But then something happens after move-in. The first separate utility bill arrives. Maybe it's fine, maybe it's not. But either way, your rent number was only the first seen. The full housing cost is now being revealed, one service at a time. That's the mechanism hiding in plain sight. With utilities included, the landlord is usually folding expected utility costs into the monthly rent. You may pay a higher rent number, but you get a cleaner budget line. With utilities separate, you may get a lower rent number, but you carry more of the month-to-month swing. Usage changes, weather changes, rates vary by location. The building might be efficient, or it might leak heat, like it has a personal grudge against your paycheck. Not because anyone has to be doing something sneaky. Just because separate bills make the total less predictable. And that's the comparison nobody makes. Utilities included rent is less like free utilities and more like a flat rate plan. The value isn't only the electricity or water. The value is knowing what number is coming. But here's the next layer. Predictable and cheapest are not the same goal. In 2024, Zillow said 86% of renters categorized staying within budget as very or extremely important. That's a clue. Because when people say they want affordable housing, they might mean, I want the lowest total cost possible. Or they might mean, I need my monthly costs to stop jumping out from behind doors. Those are different problems. If you're barely trying to keep the month stable, predictable can be worth more than a possible discount. A fixed rent with utilities included setup can make it easier to plan groceries, gas, insurance, childcare, debt payments, and the little expenses that somehow all announce themselves on the same Tuesday. But if you're trying to minimize total cost, separate utilities can still be smarter in the right situation. Let me be fair about that. If you use very little energy, travel often, live in an efficient unit, or you're genuinely good at managing usage, Paying separately gives you control. You can see each service, electricity here, water there, gas over there. You can adjust, turn off lights, run fewer loads, become the person who says, close the door, we're not cooling the whole neighborhood. I respect that person. That person is doing household economics in real time. But control only helps when the variables cooperate. Credit Ninja reported in 2026 that renters in the US spend about $253 per month on basic utilities such as electricity, gas, water, and fuel for a 915 square foot apartment. Don't mix that directly with Zillow's median figure, like both sources are measuring the exact same basket in the exact same way. They may define the bundle differently, and that's the point. The word utility sounds simple until you ask what's inside it. Is internet included? Is trash separate? Is water billed by your unit, split across the building, or calculated through a formula? Is heat electric or gas? Is fuel part of the setup? Does included mean truly included or included up to a cap? That last question is where people miss something important. A lease can say utilities are included and then add a line that limits how much is included. A utility allowance, a cap, a phrase that basically says, we cover up to this amount and anything over that becomes your bill. That one sentence can turn included into included-ish. And now the comparison changes again. Because a true utilities included rent gives you one kind of predictability. A rent with a utility cap gives you some predictability, but not all of it. Paying separately gives you the most visibility and control, but also the most exposure to monthly changes. So the question is not which apartment has lower rent. The question is, how many separate doors can money walk through after rent is paid? That's the adult math. Not exciting, not glamorous, very useful. A family can plan around one housing number, set autopay, map it to paychecks, decide what's left for groceries, transit, savings, and the emergencies that always act personally offended when you don't have money ready. But when utilities are separate, the full housing cost lands in pieces. One bill this week, another next week, maybe a seasonal spike later. And pieces are harder to feel until they're already due. That's how a deal becomes a monthly surprise. So here's the practical test before you choose. Don't compare rent to rent. Compare monthly housing cost to monthly housing cost. Ask exactly which services are included: electricity, gas, water, trash, fuel, internet. Ask which ones you pay separately. Ask whether the landlord or property manager can provide typical utility ranges for that unit or building. Ask whether water is individually metered or allocated. Ask whether heat is electric or gas. Ask whether included has a cap, allowance, or overage charge. And read the lease slowly. Not skim. Not, the kitchen has nice cabinets, I'm sure it's fine. Slowly. Because the cheapest rent can still be the more stressful housing cost if the missing utilities are sitting off stage. I used to hear older relatives say, the rent is not the rent until you know what keeps the lights on. I thought that was just old school fussing. It wasn't. It was the whole comparison. If your main goal is predictable monthly housing costs, utilities included rent may be the safer choice, since utility expenses can add a substantial and location-dependent extra bill. Not because included is automatically cheaper, because it can turn a moving target into one cleaner number. So next time you see the lower rent listing, don't just stare at the bold number. Picture the everyday callback. You're standing in that kitchen, the lights are on, the heater air is running, and the first separate service bill has just hit your inbox. Did the deal still feel like a deal? Here's the specific question. In your last rental, what was the biggest separate utility or service bill that made the monthly housing cost feel different from the listing?